Was it a flyby of the beach?
Holy crap, the mountain is on fire.
This is a sensation, the loudest emergency in Russia. In the sky over Moscow, air defense mistakenly attacked the passenger plane. The Minsk-Moscow flight. Here.
It's burning. Look, even the trees are on fire.
The pilot's last words. We're on fire. Our own people are shooting us down. The Russian aircraft ended up in the sky over the Moscow region. A Panzer missile mistook it for an enemy drone. The explosion occurred during the approach to land at Sheremetyevo.
Brand new.
Secret data has surfaced. There's panic in the Ministry of Murder. Military communications are down. Was this Putin's order or a system failure? A cover regime has been introduced at Vnukovo and Sementyevo. Takeoffs and landings are prohibited. There's panic and evacuation there. A sensation? Russian air defense attacked a passenger plane on the Minsk-Moscow flight. This is the most high-profile emergency of the night. New details? The Panzer system opened fire right in the sky over the Moscow region. The airliner was mistaken for a drone. The plane was damaged but managed to make it to Sheremetyevo. The pilot's last words. They're shooting us down, our own. And this isn't an isolated incident. During the night, there was a wave of explosions and fires all across Russia. Russian air defense is already working on its own. Shells fall on residential areas. A multi-story building caught fire in the Moscow region. There is no gun either. The apartments are burning. Orba in SU attacks Moscow, central Moscow, and the Moscow region.
Peshakuti Mountains now.
Drones crash into high-rise buildings. There's a fire there.
Here are the fragments. Over there, the apartment is burning. It's terrifying. What an explosion. I just managed to run away in time.
Everything is burning. Apartments are on fire. There are screams. A large-scale evacuation is underway.
Something hit. All my windows were blown out with the glass.
Muscovites are screaming.
Something hit.
I am looking for something. I wonder where it could be. Where is it? I am begging you to please stop this right now, Penza. You must cease fire immediately and hold your position before anyone else gets hurt.
At the CHP plant. The city is in blackout, and this is already the work of the good Ukrainian drones.
A lot of them are flying toward the city. It hit hard there. A direct hit in the second.
In Dubna, the Kronstadt enterprise where drones are produced was attacked again. In Tula, a series of strikes hit the design bureau where air defense systems are developed. Strikes have been recorded in Kursk, Tula, Tver, Moscow, the Moscow region, and Dubna. Russia is in a panic. And most importantly, in Belgorod, a Russian air defense missile. It also hit a residential building. Today is one of the most shameful episodes in the history of Russian air defense. They shot down their own passenger plane. Who gave the order? Why is the air defense operating blindly? And who will be next? While Moscow is putting out fires, panzer complexes in high-rise buildings are firing indiscriminately into the sky. Today we are joined by the well-known military analyst Colonel Roman Tsvetan. He will explain how something like this is even possible and what it means for Putin and the front. And what happens next?
A couple of planes will crash after being hit by these Panzers. And believe me, the third one simply won't take off. They'll ground them and just sit tight quietly, not making a move. First of all, the Russians really do have a very good army air defense system. That's the Panzer. Yes, the Panzer 1, Panzer 2. They've already packed 48 missiles into the second one, while the first had 12. So it's not a bad machine, an excellent machine, but it needs to operate in a combat environment. That is when everything and everyone around is the enemy, as they say. That's the mode it operates in. Well, it's an army air defense system, an army surface-to-air missile complex. It's used to cover troops on the move, even during an offensive, specifically for protection, shooting down anything that moves, because everything is considered hostile in that situation. And these pansirs, it's not a bad machine, but again, I'll repeat, it's a military mechanism. They put it on civilian airfields. But only the Russians could come up with that. That is to use such a good machine in this way for destruction. Any aircraft, no matter what level, even drones, the Panzer has cannons. Well, the first Panzer has cannons and they work pretty well. And it's the same story with the missile. The missile reaches up to 20 kilometers within a radius of 18 to 20 kilometers. It will shoot down almost everything. And these Panzers are deployed by the Russians at airfields, on rooftops, even on the Ministry of Defense. They install this Panzer, and naturally, if it starts firing in all directions, I'll repeat, it is supposed to operate in the field during an offensive against the enemy when covering their own troops. But here they put it in the center of Moscow on top of a high-rise building. And where is it going to shoot? Yeah, it's going to be firing at the high rises. Within a 20-kilometer radius, people would have a mental breakdown. That's definitely not just a nervous breakdown, that's 100% certain. Because at any moment, a Panzer missile could end up in someone's toilet. Just imagine you sit down and suddenly, hello, good evening, we're from Ukraine. That's pretty much how it happened this time, by the way. We had a widespread attack, which was problematic, I would say, in terms of efficiency. We've said so many times that there's no point in hitting Russians in all directions. After all, they have those same Panzers and they shoot down most of them. It's better to strike at a single area. But nevertheless, they struck Kronstadt, that's in Dubna, and there, indeed, it's a serious facility. First of all, Dubna is one of Russia's technological centers north of Moscow. It's about 140 kilometers from Moscow, I believe. But still, the Nuclear Research Center is located there, one of Russia's main ones. You'd have to actually go there and see what they're running in circles, protons with neutrons. They run them in that direction clockwise or maybe counterclockwise. It's the same situation in Dubna. In Kronstadt, they assemble components and units for Russia's aviation and missile technology. They should have shut that place down a long time ago. It would be better if all our drones, for example, went to Dubna and took out one or another target there. Both of them need to be taken out. But for now, we're talking about the Vir. Nevertheless, this Vir strike, with at least a dozen targets for the Russians, well, nervous breakdowns are guaranteed. That's 100%. Because they scattered, fired the same missiles in all directions, and even tried to shoot down their own plane. They tried, but it didn't work. Can you imagine how clumsy they are? They couldn't even shoot down a civilian plane. Well, I mean, if you look at it from this perspective, obviously it's sarcasm on one hand, but on the other, it's an indicator of some of the technical capabilities of these types of strike systems. And as for the fact that the Panzers will hit civilian targets, that's 100% certain, as long as they are stationed in residential neighborhoods, they will hit high-rise buildings. So brace yourselves for strikes from your own side. But Russians are already used to it.
Friends, please like this video and write in the comments what you think about the Panzer firing at a civilian plane, at civilian targets. Once again, this is very important. Russian air defense is firing at its own. Everything is falling onto residential apartments. In the Moscow region, a high-rise building caught fire in Pushkino, and there's also a fire in Penza. There's a fire at the thermal power plant, and the city is in blackout. In Belgorod, an air defense missile hit a residential building, and in Dubna, the Kronstadt enterprises where drones are produced were attacked again. In Tula, there was a series of strikes on the design bureau where air defense systems are developed. Strikes are being recorded in Kursk, Tver, the Moscow region, Dubna, and Russia is in a panic. Roman, Igor, regarding Tula, there we struck the design bureau where air defense systems are developed for everyone.
Post offices. Well, as for the design bureau, you can use drones there. After all, it's in an open area, not underground. It's not a military facility. In its pure form, a deeply buried facility, which can only be reached with concrete piercing warheads or with ballistic missiles. But the Russians do have some pretty serious design bureaus. There are design bureaus that produce, including in Tula, but mostly they are located in the Moscow region and the Moscow suburbs. Why do I always talk about Moscow? Although there is one in Tula and there are a few more, up to the Urals at least, in several cities there are design bureaus that are involved in the development of both aviation and missile technology and, of course, ground-based strike systems. But the main innovative developments now, which are related to drones, control systems, and new warhead systems, that is, it's an entire process that needs to be destroyed at its root. And so in principle, when it comes to design bureaus, well, it makes sense to use a drone. A drone, how much can it carry? Well, 50 kilograms in a backpack. Well, it won't do anything to a military facility that's buried 3 floors underground. Well, nothing will come of it. A design bureau can be in a penthouse somewhere where the designers are, they like to get some fresh air. And then a fierce beaver comes flying in, both fierce and a beaver at the same time, from here and from there. But in reality, of course, it's better to use drones against oil refineries. At refineries, believe me, even a single drone, if it gets through and completes its mission, can inflict extremely serious damage. Why? Because a refinery is practically ready to catch fire on its own. All it needs is a match. And here, 50 kilograms of explosives could fall right on top of it.
Roman Illich regarding Dubna, where the Kronstadt enterprise was attacked, where they also produce drones. We have repeatedly discussed that Dubna is home to nuclear facilities, nuclear research sites, but we keep attacking there constantly. How important is it to carry out these strikes? And you always say that the strikes need to be effective. So does that mean we really need to almost completely destroy the facility? The floor is yours.
Well, you're right. You're a woman, but you've grasped the main idea. Exactly. What's the point of wasting our drones if there's no efficiency? So let's say we produced 100 drones. First of all, people chipped in for these drones. They were produced, purchased, and delivered to the troops. After that target designation is given, they fly off in all directions, but there's air defense at the site. There are those same Panzer systems stationed there. So the Panzer, let's say, is loaded with 12 missiles. So if you send the 13th drone there, it will get through and complete its combat mission. The Panzer will shoot down 12 or however many it can. That's why there's no point in just sending them off in all directions. Sending a swarm of drones, 5 per each Panzer system, that's how they'll shoot them down. What's the efficiency of that? In other words, when there's no efficiency, then the question arises. It just turns into the disposal of drones. That's what it comes down to. I've already explained it in simple terms. That's how every air defense system works. There's what's called the saturation coefficient of the system. So, in order to exceed this saturation coefficient at a single point, you need to send about twice as many drones as that coefficient. If there's one Panzer system, just to put it simply, if there's one Panzer and it's loaded with 12 missiles, then with one salvo, roughly speaking, it can shoot down 12 drones. That means you need to send 24 drones there, and then they'll accomplish the combat mission. But as it is, so far they've only been sent out in the information space. Dasha and I can confirm, yes, there was some drone flight somewhere, but what's the efficiency of that? That's what I'm saying. Even you are already clearly identifying this. Efficiency is important, and that's much more important than the informational message itself about someone flying somewhere and someone shooting at someone somewhere. That is, but from a military perspective, there's absolutely nothing to it. There's a bit of showmanship here, but believe me, actors have never won wars. Wars are won by military professionals who plan combat missions, allocate enough forces and resources for each mission in order to achieve a certain efficiency coefficient. But now, at least when it comes to target designation, some theatrical techniques are being used and nothing more. Some little announcements were made. They collected money for tickets, and then everyone scattered like gypsies, but only in the worst, in a bad sense.
Roman Igorevich, here's another batch of information. So, last night, the Lukovitsy aircraft plant in the Moscow region of Russia was attacked. This has been confirmed. The NSDC says it specializes in the production and modernization of MiG-29 and MiG-31 fighter jets, as well as their modifications. They are also involved in the development of new combat aviation models, in particular projects of a next-generation frontline fighter. These are quotes based on the MiG platform. It is also involved in the modernization cycle of Garand drones, wrote Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the NSDC of Ukraine. What do you think? And
this is exactly our point. It confirms it. Look at what the CPD people are saying. A plant producing MiGs was attacked. As a military man, I immediately asked these performers, did you destroy the plant? Will MiGs be taken to the skies or not? What will they answer? No, it wasn't destroyed, but it was attacked. What is the point of this attack? So that in the information flow, the CPD people could say that something like this happened. Now, if the CPD clearly confirmed that after the attack by our drones, the production cycle of the MiG-29 was halted for a month or 2 months or even 3, then that would be some kind of coefficient of useful action. But what do they say? Such and such a factory was attacked. There were attacks in Dubna, some factory over there. Something was attacked there. And what's the point of these attacks? That's what I'm talking about. Or else just keep quiet. Don't talk about how you're suckers. In that case, just stay silent about the fact that you simply burned through several dozen drones, basically sending them straight into the enemy's air defense. They achieved nothing. The Center for Countering Disinformation confirmed this clearly. The report goes like this: a factory was attacked, and that's it. But the real report that should have come out is this: the factory was destroyed, the target was destroyed. But I understand why they can't say that, because you can't destroy a military factory with drones. Military factories are built to withstand a nuclear strike. So how are you going to destroy it with a 50-kilogram drone? Next question. So why are you sending these drones to military factories then? What's the point of sending them? For what purpose? To achieve what? Just to dispose of the drones? Let me repeat, where can drones actually be sent? Why does it explode and burn on its own? You can use them against above-ground depots, not underground, but above-ground ones. There are transshipment depots, so-called transit warehouses, for example. They are located at certain distances, 500 and 700 kilometers away. So you can target those. You can also strike airfields and oil refineries. And that's it. You can also operate in Crimea. Why is it still possible to operate there? If you approach from the sea, it's inconvenient for them to shoot down targets because they're afraid that our Magura drones with anti-aircraft missile systems could take down their helicopters and planes. This has already happened more than once. So there are no more targets for drones. That's why our information operations people and our politically motivated target spotters need to drop this act. In the end, let the military handle target designation and allocate enough forces and resources to destroy the given target. And believe me, when the military does the calculations, there are certain coefficients they use when they calculate how many drones need to be sent, for example, to destroy that same target in Dubna. Then we won't hear anything else about it. What we'll hear is that 150 drones entered Dubna, and believe me, nothing will be left there, at least for this particular task. But just sending them out to be burned for nothing, well, what can I say? No matter how much we talk about this, everyone is starting to talk about it now. Our political leadership is exposing itself far too obviously now. Such great target designators they are. Of course, it's not even about target designation. They've started an interesting trend. They coordinate the target. Some targets get approved, others don't. That's all there is to it. Those are the ones for the approved targets. They didn't pay anything, as they say. Most likely they paid for the approval. Remember that old joke. When a traffic cop checks your documents and says, not allowed, then he sees a 10. Oh, now it's allowed. Go ahead. It's pretty much the same situation here. That's how it looks, at least from an analytical point of view. But as for how it really is, well, that's for counterintelligence to deal with. The disposal of our drones wherever they end up. Roman
Nikolaevich, considering the aviation collapses, can we assume that the time will really come when Russian Pantsir systems will shoot down their own civilian planes taking off from Sheremetyevo or Pulkovo?
A couple of planes will crash after being hit by these Pantsirs. And believe me, the third one simply won't take off. They'll ground them and everyone will just sit quietly on their butts and not move anywhere. They'll travel by train up to the Urals, and only after the Urals will they fly. Well, how far is it to the Urals? 2,000 kilometers. Yeah, they'll rattle along. It's not a problem.
Successfully demobilized. Commander of the 155th Separate Marine Brigade, Colonel Ilyin Sergey. No details are being reported, but everyone is saying it's Karma, ISU, GUR, SBU. They will find every war criminal, no matter where they are. And the Chief of Staff of the 155th Separate Marine Brigade, Colonel Bashkardin Leonid. Roman Lvovich, the floor is yours.
This was a strike on the headquarters of the 155th. In fact, there was an initial and a repeated strike. And as a result, almost the entire command of the 155th Brigade was wiped out, along with the former brigade commander, who at that moment was, well, you could also say already the former deputy commander of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. In other words, they took quite a hit. About a dozen officers at that time, high-ranking ones were taken out. For the Russians, such an action is very good. Ours, that is. They have a big bench of reserves. Everyone wants to become an admiral, a general, and so on, and so forth. So here you could say we help the enemy climb the career ladder. But in reality, the 155th Brigade, they've already been wiped out 649 times. And for us, it was at Vuhledar. In Vuhledar, they lost 2 full units. For example, the brigade commander who was in Vuhledar, he was taken out. Plus, the new brigade commander who replaced him was also taken out, but this time near Kursk. This direction is very advantageous for us because the Russians there don't have such a serious layered line of defense, specifically along the Kursk axis. Why not? They're extremely frightened idiots. They thought we wouldn't move towards Moscow. That is the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. There isn't a defensive line there, like, for example, the Surovikin line in Zaporizhia or Donbas, which has been built up over 11 years. The extremely frightened idiots don't have that. They're covering this direction either with naval infantry or paratroopers. The main naval infantry units there are the 810th Naval Infantry Brigade, which is from Crimea, and the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade, which is from Vladivostok. There was also the Caspian Naval Infantry Brigade from the Caspian region, along with several other units, plus the Ivanovo paratroopers. It turns out there are paratroopers in Ivanovo, or rather there were. So basically, they gathered up the last guys and sent them to Kursk. And now in Ivanovo, they'll have to create an LGBT community because there are no men left. But something has to be done because the women in Ivanovo are stunning, absolutely gorgeous. So that's the kind of attrition happening along the Kursk direction, specifically in the area where even the leadership of the 155th Brigade was wiped out. These are Glushkovo, Lilgov, Rilsk, Korenevo, Chetkino. These are the rear areas of the Russian corps that's now still trying to shuffle around somewhere along the Sumy direction. Since
January, Russia has lost 100,000 soldiers killed. Not total losses, but killed. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, after meeting with Lavrov, give your assessment of this political statement.
Well, if Lavrov confirms such losses to him, then we can believe him. At the very least, Rubio wouldn't just say something like that for no reason. The question is, in what context is he saying all this? After all, they are still trying to stop the fighting by giving up our territory. In other words, under a capitulation scenario. A ceasefire at this point, according to Rubio and his associates, meaning Trump as well, would be a capitulation by Ukraine. That is, it implies that the Russian army would retain control over the occupied part of Ukraine, which is more than a fifth, over 20% is already under occupation. So in this context, when fears are being stoked, then you can perceive and understand that we are simply being pushed toward capitulation, toward the loss of territory, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and so on and so forth. I think there's no point in paying attention to such statements. Why? Because Ukrainians will not stop. This concerns Ukrainians. Ukrainians, Cossacks, yes, they have never given up their land to anyone. Land and freedom are the main slogans of our people, of our grandfathers and great-grandfathers. That is, we will definitely carry out our combat mission up to the state border. So after we reach the state border, we will destroy them. Part of the Russian army, by that time, God willing, with the sanctions from Malyuk and Budanov, we will destroy Russian oil refineries and the Russian economy will collapse. That's when we'll talk about the losses of the Russian army and we'll confirm them. And believe me, they won't be in the hundreds of thousands, they'll be in the millions of Russians.
God willing, dear audience, once again, please like this video, share your opinion and analysis in the comments, and write a few words to our duo with Roman Grigorievich. We work for you 3 times a week, and that's very important. Roman Grigorievich regarding We Don't Stop. So we've come to an important topic, occupied Crimea. Now I will provide you with a series of information for analysis and discussion. 2 powerful explosions were heard in the Krasnoperekopsky district, according to subscribers of Crimean Wind. Next. A missile launch took place in the Jankoy district at 11:25. A loud explosion was heard in the Krasnoperekopsky district. Russian air defense was active in Jankoy. The attack by Ukrainian drones is extremely powerful, according to reports from occupied Crimea. There is a massive 26-kilometer traffic jam before the Tachenka bridge at the exit from Crimea. Right now, missile launch Roman Grigorievich, our attack on Crimea continues.
At the very least, I think our drone specialists have entered, along with the shawarma vendors. And a 26-kilometer traffic jam. Can you imagine how much money they're making right now at the exit from Crimea? And now even corn is being sold. So this whole Crimean process, we understand it perfectly. They're going to make a fortune. In other words, by getting a certain cut from these shawarma vendors, you could make even more, or at least buy more drones and send them wherever they're needed. But seriously, of course, there was an attack on Crimea last night. Drones were coming in, missiles were coming in, and yes, Neptunes were being intercepted there. Russians on social media were freaking out at night, saying everything there would be wiped out. Not everything, though. Mostly they were targeting anti-aircraft missile systems. By the way, it was exactly the air defense system that tried to intercept, and specifically the air defense system located in Jankoy. Why is it always near Jankoy? We've talked several times about strikes near Jankoy. Why? Because there's an airfield there. There's an airfield. A tactical one, mainly for army aviation, helicopters there. They get reloaded. So there is a Zenit air defense system located there. There are S-300s, S-400s. Since we already took one out, they've deployed it again. And that's why people constantly hear entries in the Krasnoperekopsk area and exits in the same area. Jankoy, this is exactly the work of the Russian air defense, which covers the Kerch direction from the northwest. And that's why it's very important for us not to slow down the pace. The strikes, at least every other night or every 2 nights, we need to hit the enemy's air defense, including in Jankoy, and wipe it out completely. That attempt was made, and today drones entered the area. I think this won't be the last time. So little by little, we're getting closer toward our main objective, the Kerch Bridge. Well, and a 26-kilometer traffic jam, that's sacred. They've been robbed, warmed up, and so on. So at this point, these are the Russians' problems. They knew where they were going, so let them figure out how they'll get out.
Get out of Crimea, yes, only by swimming, breaststroke, freestyle, as you suggested. Or
Dog paddle.
yes, dog paddle, all the options. Roman Grigorievich has already articulated this very clearly in previous episodes. Watch the previous episodes. Roman Grigorievich, and regarding Crimea, the cherry on top is that mobile service went down. Cell phones, everything is down, and of course the Russians are sending messages saying nothing is working for them. Isn't that wonderful, right?
Well, the thing is, in this case, there are 2 options. Either write letters to your grandfather in the village or dig out your pagers. Remember, back in the last millennium, we had to set up pager networks in Crimea. So what's going on with them now? Well, at least they won't be calling on the rails anymore after all. Although, who knows, Russians can do all sorts of crazy things.
I've prepared the following information for you as the cherry on top. Meanwhile, in Orsk, Orenburg region of Russia, a mechanical plant is on fire. According to local social media groups, those are some impressive explosions I see. The 8th workshop of the enterprise is burning. Supposedly, the fire started with some materials catching fire. The Orsk mechanical plant, a major Russian engineering enterprise, produces goods for the defense industry, including shell casings and components for multiple rocket launch systems. It also specializes in equipment for the oil and gas sector. Roman Lvovich, well, they sweetened the story a bit for us with the oil and gas sector. Over to you.
Because these are our concerned citizens. They accomplished several tasks at once. First, it's truly a military facility. Second, it's an industry, including the oil and gas sector. And third, the main thing. You noticed it, right? Our concerned citizens have revealed, it turns out, where the orcs' lair is. In Orsk. So specifically there, that's where all the orcs are coming at us from. Well, at the very least, informationally. So a big thank you to our concerned citizens. Thank you very much. Really. Why? This is because we clearly see their actions and observe them directly. They really are causing certain problems in the Russian economy. Oil transfer mechanisms of various kinds are burning. They set fire to pipelines and oil pumping stations. In Komsomolsk on Amur, they burned down an oil refinery. So they're targeting the energy sector, and really just one match is enough. Dry brush is set on fire where the pipeline runs, and that's it. You can write off the pipeline, especially if it's gas. So they're taking action. And work is also being done directly on enterprises, which in principle can also be put out of commission if you know how. And I'll say it again. There are plenty of people who care, because this is war. A genocidal war of the Moscow Empire against Ukraine, against Ukrainians, and it's already worn out everyone, even Russians. Moreover, let's not forget that there are over 10 million people of Ukrainian descent there alone. In Russia, besides the fact that there are dozens of states, dozens of republics, and regional state entities that have now been practically conquered by this Moscow Empire, this Moscow Khanate, and they, in the end, also want their freedom. In other words, this prison of nations must be destroyed, and it can be destroyed from within as well.
Roman Grigorievich for the conclusion. In Russia, they are expecting drone attacks, but not from outside the country, but from within Russia itself. Sources from the VTHK OGPU channel reported that heightened security measures were introduced for law enforcement in Moscow due to possible attacks. All defense and shelter systems were put on high alert. FSB officers were deployed to duty almost in full force.
Well, it's right to be afraid. Why? Because how long have we been talking about this? It's the 2nd year now. You just go to the market, buy an FPV drone, attach some explosives to it, send it off, and complete a combat mission. When it comes to oil refineries, that's a whole different story. With a single grenade, you can burn down the whole plant if you know where to hit. With a single grenade, you can shut down a metallurgical plant if you blow it up, say, with an FPV drone or directly blow up the oxygen workshop. In other words, there are such critical points at every plant, at every enterprise, and those who care know them very well. And as for what mechanisms are already being used in these kinds of actions, well, every concerned person chooses for themselves, just so that they don't get caught by the Russian FSB, Russian police, gendarmerie, call them whatever you like. And these are the mechanisms that are being used. Today, for example, we discussed how in Orsk, at the center of the Russian movement in Orsk, a factory burned down, or at least a workshop did. So yes, from the standpoint of preparation, it's true that this process will intensify in the near future. It's already intensifying, and the concentration of certain means of destruction in one location is very important for us. Just like in aviation with drones concentrated in one spot. And now the best option for everyone who cares is to gather in Moscow as well. Moscow needs to be burned too. That is, Moscow and Muscovites, those who make decisions and practically drain all of Russia, need to understand this. They suck out every last drop they can. They should feel this war. And not just the war against Ukraine. This is also a war against Moldova, the Pridnestrovian Republic. A war against Georgia. We saw that perfectly well. The war in Syria. Wherever Russians go, wherever Russians set foot, some kind of war always starts there.
Burning Moscow, a perfect ending. Dear audience, we work with Roman Grigorievich 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for audiences all over the world on my YouTube channel, Dasha Happy, Roman Svetan, a well-known analyst. Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and see you again on Monday.
Goodbye.